Welcome to another episode of Leadership Lessons. My guest today is Pastor Darrell Crawford, and we're going to talk about leading a church in evangelism. Brother Darrell, thank you for joining Leadership Lessons.
Thank you for having me.
Let me tell you a little bit about Darrell. Darrell Crawford is lead pastor at Living Hope Baptist Church in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. He previously served as pastor from 2006 to 2010 at Lafayette Baptist Church in Lafayette, Kentucky. He's married to his wife, Angie. They have two children, a son named Austin, daughter named Grace. And so, Darrell, let's just jump right in with these questions. Tell us how you came to know Christ, trust in Him, and then subsequently your call to ministry after that.
Sure. Well, I wasn't raised in a Christian home at all, really, and although I was baptized when I was a little kid, but I couldn't tell you anything else other than that.
Right.
When I was in high school, I started dating my wife, Angie, and Angie was the real deal from the earliest days of her childhood. She loved the Lord, and she treasured Christ, and I could play the part, okay, and I did that for several years, and we got married in 1995. And just the longer we were married, the more kind of a double life I began to live. I would go to church with her on Sundays and just live a completely disconnected life from anything with Christianity for years. And then it got to where between just lying and gambling and alcohol just really was ruining my life and ruining our marriage. And there was a day I pulled my truck over on the side of the road over around Drakesboro, Kentucky. I was in sales. I traveled around about 3 states and pulled over around Drakesboro, Kentucky. And for the first time in my life, I come to the realization that what Jesus did on the cross was sufficient to take away my sin and make me right with God. And I think for the first time ever, I truly treasure Jesus. And I tell people I've never been the same since I pulled over that day.
Yeah.
And so the Lord rescued me that day. And then pretty much instantly, I was convinced that if God could save me, He could save anyone.
Yeah.
And so I almost instantly, I had a desire to see other people saved. And so I just wanted to talk with people. And that was October of 2004. So that's 20 years ago.
Yep. And
then in July of 2005, I went on a mission trip to Brazil. And there were about 5 or 6 other pastors on that trip. And at some point during that trip, all 5 or 6 of them pulled me off to the side and kind of said, it looks like the Lord may be calling you into ministry. And if He is, you should be thinking about that. And they had no idea what was going on in my mind. And so then by November of 2005, the call to ministry really just become irresistible. And so November of 2005, I surrendered to preach. By January of 2006, I was preaching every Sunday in Lafayette, and which is crazy because, Paul claimed to know nothing but Christ crucified. That's all I knew.
Yeah.
And by March, I was the pastor there, and I pastored there for 4 years, and then been at Living Hope since 2010.
It's a great story, and I've gotten to watch most of that story. We lived out. I was in your neck of the woods. So I have a question about Angie. What was she doing while you were living that double life and just kind of watching your life implode because of your own choices? How was she handling that as a believer who loved the Lord, obviously loved you, and knew things weren't going in the right direction?
Yeah. I think if you read 1 Peter 3 about a woman who's obedient to the word and winning her husband to the word without a word. I mean, I think 1 Peter 3 looked like my wife when I was disobedient to the word. She would say that she didn't know what she was doing. Sometimes she would lock me out of the house. Sometimes she would cry. Sometimes she would beg. Sometimes she would want to kill me probably. But I think she just prayed. I can't tell you how many times I walked in a room and caught her on her knees praying for me, and I'd just turn around and walk out. And I'm really thankful for. I told her birthday was yesterday, and I told her, I think everything good about me is from God's grace, but it's no one's humanly more responsible for my salvation, and much of God's grace to me is for you because of her, probably.
What an incredible story. Well, we're going to talk about evangelism, and for some Christians, just hearing the word itself is like, that's not for me, that's for someone else, or it strikes fear in their hearts. Darrell, how have you helped people in your church? I mean, so you described your conversion, and then immediately following, it's like other people need to hear this story. What happened in my life should happen in others' lives, which I think is completely natural as the Holy Spirit's come to live inside of you. I think evangelism is natural for a new believer, and then something happens that it starts becoming more of a challenge for us. Mm-hmm. So how have you helped people in your church overcome that fear and experience that right excitement about sharing Christ?
Yeah, I think doing evangelism regularly and talking about it. I hope that our church would say that I would share my failures. And there are lots of times where I've been in opportunities where I should have shared the gospel and I didn't do it. And I hope they would see that. They would see. We try to tell people what the good, bad, and ugly of what happens when you're doing evangelism. I think preaching regularly, about the gospel and pushing evangelism in those ways, taking people with me when we do evangelism is helpful. I think a lot of it is just doing it, being faithful doing it, and when you're around your people and everything becomes about the gospel, then you become to love the gospel more. The more you know the gospel, the more you love the gospel. The more you love the gospel, the more you're going to talk about the gospel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it makes perfect sense. I agree with you 100%. The greatest motivation for evangelism is to do evangelism, and that feels kind of opposite. But man, once you get started and try to talk to people, you want to talk to more people. And so, Darrell, I remember early on as you were growing in the Lord and in your service to Christ, you were kind of involved with the Way of the Master, Ray Comfort. You got some training, you did some street preaching, and you would kind of go into a restaurant and give a gospel booklet to pretty much everyone that was there. How has your own personal evangelism transitioned over the years? Do you still do the same things you did earlier, or you do things a little different? And if so, how?
Well, I think I would say I think I still do things the same way. Yeah. I may not do as much street preaching as I once did. I want to. I'm not as consistent with this as I once was or I want to be. But I used to tell our church, if you catch me out somewhere without gospel tracts, I'll give you $5.
Oh, yeah.
And nobody's caught me without one yet, but I haven't said that in a while either, though. There are sometimes I might get caught without them, but I mean, I do think, and God has been so gracious to us in our church about bringing visitors to our church, that some of our door-to-door evangelism we haven't had time to do as much as that because it's everything we can do to just stay on top of following up with people that have been coming here. So God is bringing the doors to us, and we're really grateful for that. But I hope that we would say we do it, similar. Maybe I'm not as obnoxious as I once was. I hope, maybe.
That's actually a pretty good tool you can use, and you may have done this before, but I just tell folks, if I'm sharing oftentimes with a complete stranger at a restaurant or wherever, cash register, I'll say, look, I'm one of those obnoxious Christians. I just think everybody needs to hear, and that kind of like they'll laugh and I can laugh, and it kind of lowers the temperature a little. Yeah. Darrell, you've served as pastor of 2 different churches. Talk about the role that a pastor plays in, for lack of better terms, building an evangelistic church or helping a church have an evangelistic culture. What role does preaching and personal practice? Tell us about that.
So I think, like I said earlier, I do think preaching, that when we don't preach moralistic messages, like all of the pastors at our church are just, everything we do is going to be gospel centered in every message. And I think the more that we communicate the gospel regularly, and I think our literature of our small groups is going to be very gospel centered. When we do any kind of trainings, I think as we talk with our teachers, we want to talk about the gospel with them. The more that we can get people to understand the gospel, I think that just helps to get people to want to talk about the gospel. And again, I think modeling it. I can remember a guy, you may know Chad Maddox. Chad is a solid brother, great Sunday school teacher and great evangelist, works for Coca-Cola. Chad would go with me and sharing the gospel with people, and he would just go with me and just listen and not say anything. And then I remember one day he said, if I don't there's no need of me going if I don't ever talk.
Yeah.
And so finally he started sharing the gospel, and now he probably shares with more people during a week than I do. So I think, again, practicing it, doing it, modeling it. And if the preaching and your teaching is always centered around the cross, I hope it develops a culture where every Christian just thinks we're just supposed to talk about Jesus.
Mm-hmm. And you're arming them to do that through your messages and your small groups. Darrell, if a young pastor came to you, someone similar to your own story that's just getting started in ministry, and said, Brother Darrell, I like the way you do ministry here. I want to lead a church to have an evangelistic culture and regular practice. I think I'm hearing you say that you would tell them, focus on the gospel, preach the cross over and over and over, preach Jesus, and folks to fall in love with him. Are there any other practical tips that you would share with that pastor?
Yeah, I mean, pray. I remember early on, shortly after I was converted, I began to pray that God would break my heart for lost people. I want to treasure the glory of the cross, and I want that to drive me. I do think we should be praying for a burden for lost people. In Matthew 9, Jesus saw thousands of people, and he felt compassion for them.
Yeah.
I think one of the Bible passages that led me to surrender to ministry was Luke 19:41, when Jesus comes to the city. So he looks over the city and he wept over it. Mm-hmm. Which should tell us if Jesus was weeping over his city, we ought to weep over our city.
Yeah.
And so I think praying for a burden for the lost, where it can become natural because you really are trying to rescue someone, because that's what it means. You know what's at stake in evangelism. And I think I would say take people with you. I think some of the best discipleship, it's good to go through books. It's good to teach people to read the Bible. But man, I think some of the best discipleship we can do is just take people with us on visits to share the gospel with people, because they're going to see one-on-one conversations. They're going to hear the gospel clearly. They're going to be able to observe some apologetics from time to time. They're going to see how the Bible counsels people in whatever situation they're dealing with. I think it's great discipleship to do it when no one's watching, and take them with you when you do it, and so they can see.
They're also going to see that we don't always have the answers. That we don't always handle every question exactly right. I always know exactly what to say in every conversation about 30 minutes after the conversation is over, and they're just going to see that, and it's like that just starts taking all the pressure off of the work of evangelism. And it's like, man, I just need to be faithful, try to share Christ, and grow in that work. Darrell, I know training was a part of your early experience. I know you said in your work in sales, listen to preaching over and over, constantly all the time, listening to preachers while you're on the road. And in the way of the master, I know that was part of your life. What role does training play in helping develop an evangelistic culture in a church, and I hear you saying training in taking someone along with you, but speak to that just for a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's a good word. Yeah, so I think, once or twice a year, it's good to have like it could be a Wednesday night of a service, your Wednesday night service where you're just training everyone, or you might have, a Tuesday night where you have people come and gather to do some purposeful evangelism training with the intent of, hey, we're going to do 8 weeks of Way of the Master training, and then we're going to go hit the streets and do it. And we'll pair people up with people who are, more experienced, and and take them out and do it after, 6 or 8 weeks of training, 4 to 8 weeks of training, maybe, probably.
So I know Way of Master is a tool that Way of the Master, Ray Comfort, Kirk Cameron's part of that work. Are there any other resources or tools like that you have found helpful?
Yeah, I think they're all helpful.
Yeah.
But that's the Way of the Master really is my kind of go-to. Yeah. I just think it helps people have gospel conversations. It makes the gospel make sense. It says something about the holiness of God, something about the sinfulness of men, something about the just judgment that we deserve, the atonement of Christ dying in our place as our substitute, the resurrection hope we have in Christ, the call to repentance and faith, and the call to follow after Jesus. All of that is in that training, and I think it just makes sense to use the law to bring about the knowledge of sin. I know 3 circles is helpful in that as well. I think you actually was helpful to me in showing me even how to incorporate, both of those into one another. So you see, I mean, I think they're all good.
Yeah. They all
Most of them are good.
Yeah, I think so. Well, and the great thing about the way the Master is that it may even be more pertinent today than it would have been 20 years ago or more, because there used to be a kind of a Christian culture. Not that the world was Christian or the country was Christian, but there was kind of an understanding of at least the commands of God in culture, and there was a sense of right and wrong, where the gospel could come to a person who was experiencing guilt and shame because they knew their sin. Where today, I mean, I knocked on doors yesterday, met a young lady who is Norse pagan. She believes in Odin. That's where her confidence lies, and I don't think Odin has very high expectations of anybody, but God's law does. So it makes good sense of the need to even start with that standpoint. Darrell, from folks that you work with and people in your own church and your own life, let me ask the question this way. You started out when you were converted with a concern and burden for other people. You prayed for that burden to be intensified and grow. And we can't depend on a burden to go share the gospel. We need to share the gospel whether we feel compelled or burdened or not. Have there been times in your life when you didn't have that same intensity of concern for lost people? And when those times come, what does that tell you about yourself? And what do you do in that time?
I think you keep pressing on. I want to confess that to as many people as I can, that I'm not, sometimes I'm going through the motions because I'm doing it because I'm supposed to do it. And that's good. I think we're supposed to do it even just because we're supposed to do it. But I think it should bother us if it's not a passion. I want it to be a passion, not only a passion, a burden for lost people, but a passion for the glory of Christ, and because we love the gospel and we want, and Jesus is worth it. I think it does say for me. I think sometimes when I pray, I mean, I'm disciplined in praying, and sometimes I feel like God is in the room and with me and close to me, and sometimes I feel like He's not, and I can't just do it when I'm experiencing a feeling. I've got to pursue Him, all the time. And I think in that same way that you see evangelism as a spiritual discipline, just like you see prayer and Bible study as well. Like you do it whether you feel like it or not. But if you go long and you're not feeling an excitement and a joy in doing it, I want to confess that to brothers and deep prayer in those things, and long, and you may listen to sermons about evangelism or talk to other people who can urge you on those ways as well.
So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the kind of the local church and the impact of evangelism on a local church. You've served 2 churches. I've watched you in both of them. They've both grown numerically. There's been evangelistic fruit from both of them, and there's been fruit that lasts in both of them. The church you currently serve, Living Hope in Hopkinsville, you have 2 campuses. A building was given to you all by another church, and you needed it because your other building was full, and now it's growing and filling up. Your attendance is in the mid 400s. You shared that you have baptized 53 people, and 51 of them are still with you, which that's exciting. That's what you want That's what you want to happen. How do you manage that? How do you try to take care of those new believers? How do you counsel them as they're coming in to make sure that the best you can that conversion is happening? Just speak to that faithfulness versus fruitfulness thing just for a moment.
Yeah. So I think a lot of it, we've got really good leaders in our church. Reed Shepherd, who's one of our pastors here, and Jacob Workman. Yep. Jacob, those 53 people that have professed faith, a majority of those people are 18 to 40 years old.
Yeah, wow.
And Jacob Workman, he has a group on Thursday nights of 25, 30, 18 to 25-year-olds. Most of them are new believers, and it's not there's no music, there's no food. They're just going there and just digging into theology together. They're digging into tough questions. They did a lesson on a series on church history. I think they're walking through the book of Hebrews now. Like they're growing because they want to, and he's pouring into them that way. Reed has been so encouraging. Kent Workman is another guy that's been just so encouraging that way too. John Gibson is our pastor, ministers to our youth, and we have some good Sunday school teachers who are taking these guys, and they're just they find them and they go to them, and they so a lot of the discipleship is just, I think, some of the fruit of a church is just centered on the gospel. Like we're talking about evangelism, but evangelism is not really. I think a healthy church promotes more evangelism. Mm-hmm. As people see people professing faith in Christ and growing, and then they're taking, they're now out sharing the gospel with people too. All of that is because I think a healthy church, not just one guy or two people, pouring into people, but just people all over the church is, helping encourage one another. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. So that back to that young pastor just getting started in his new place of ministry, wanting to obey Jesus and fulfill the Great Commission in his own local context. If he's talking to you about strategy, and I realize culture matters as well as the plan for how to do it, and the culture is developed probably through preaching and modeling. But if we're thinking about strategy, I've heard you say about 4 things, I think, so far that are part of Living Hope strategy. One is faithful gospel preaching. You're preaching the gospel. Folks are hearing the gospel every Sunday and are having an opportunity to respond to what God's doing in their life through conversion. And then I've heard you talk about modeling it, that you're practicing evangelism. You're sharing stories in your messages about people that you've talked to recently, plus your church members see you at the Mexican restaurant or wherever, passed out gospel booklets or knocking on doors somewhere in the community. You've mentioned training as part of your strategy, that a couple of times a year you want to train people. And you've mentioned intentional outreach, that at the end of this training we're gonna actually go into the community and share the gospel. Is there anything else that's part of Living Hope's evangelism strategy that's not included? Do you do events, gatherings outside the Sunday morning gathering?
We do. I don't know that we have them scheduled all the time. We just had Jared Wilson preach a series of meetings at our church, and I think our goal in those things might be different depending on what time of year. We don't plan those things out maybe a long time in advance. Sometimes we do, but our goal might be to encourage people in gospel living. Sometimes it might be the goal would be bringing lost people in, hoping to see a harvest of people coming to Christ in those meetings. But that would be, I guess we could say that would be part of our strategy, but it wouldn't be as we don't do that as often. We're not doing that twice a year or anything like that.
Yeah. So let me ask about you. So you've been in ministry now, vocational ministry, for about 20 years, I think I heard you say, and you're active, you're busy, you're not just sitting around. How do you take care of yourself, Darrell? Have you experienced times when you've pushed your limits too far and have seen the impact of that on your own life and family? How did you notice it? How have you pulled back and cared well for yourself as you're leading a growing church?
So I think there have been probably several times where I've been probably there on the brink of burnout. And I think there's been good brothers that have been encouraging to me. Now that we have more of a staff, that has been a huge help. And I think maybe even learning how to lean on a staff has been helpful to me as well. I don't know if I'm probably still not doing as well at taking the kind of time. I don't know. So for instance, last week I went to a conference in Florida last week, and that was some good personal time for me to relax. But Yeah, and I do think about 2 years ago, I think my own personal prayer life just got transformed. I think I'd heard someone say that most pastors, if they were honest, they would describe their prayer life as aimless and irregular.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that probably would be how I would have classified my prayer life. And I couldn't imagine, you read guys praying for 3 hours a day, and I think, how do they have time to do that? But like, I think, getting up early in the morning and making sure time is set aside and having a strategy even in your prayer life that, on Mondays, there are some things you're going to pray for every day. There are some things you're going to pray for on Monday, some things you're going to pray for on Tuesday. Like, you have a strategy in your prayer life. I think that has helped do heart work as far as guarding and helping you be focused and energized and I don't know, does that answer your question?
It does. It helps. So, in the last couple of years, you weren't a real big guy anyway, but you've also lost some weight, and it looks like you've kind of focused in on caring well for your physical well-being. What prompted that? What are a couple of things that you've done, and how's that going?
Yeah, it's going great. I feel great. I was down in my back a lot, and my knees were hurting bad, and I think it's kind of like in building. There's a structural integrity problem.
Yeah,
there wasn't enough. And so you needed to lose weight. And I think yes, I feel great. I feel like we're eating healthier. Eat a lot of fish, a lot of vegetables. I still drink a lot of Dr. Pepper Zeros. I think that's what we're going to drink in heaven, though.
You think so? All right. So, Darrell, I know you like to read and listen to different preachers. Who's someone, you mentioned Jared Wilson coming to the church and speaking. Who's someone you've enjoyed reading lately? Who's a preacher that you're enjoying listening to consistently? Who else is pouring into your own life?
Yeah, I think so. John Piper is obviously has been such a huge impact in my life, and so I love reading and listening to him. I enjoy listening to Tony Merida. I like listening to him. I am reading some J.C. Ryle stuff. His Luke. I'm preaching through the book of Luke, and his Luke's commentary is great. I'd never heard of this guy until last week. Michael Morales. Have you ever heard of him? I think he's a seminary professor, but I heard him preach last week for the first time and loved it so much I went and bought his commentary on the book of Leviticus. I'm enjoying that. I think part of my devotion time in the morning is I want to do my Bible reading and read through a chapter of a book every day before I get started. So it's helpful in reading things. So right now I'm reading a devotional through from J.C. Ryle. I'm rereading a book, Humility from C.J. Mahaney from back early 2000s. It's just good. I could go on.
Yeah. More. So this platform is called Leadership Lessons. Tell us about either a person, a book, an experience, something from the Lord that has kind of helped shape your understanding, desire in leadership, or your approach to leading people.
Yeah. I don't think I ever put any thought into me being a leader at all for a good while. And I think maybe in my defense, I don't know that the Bible really talks a ton about the pastor as a leader, although it's important. But I think when you see, I think seeing someone struggling with things and you realize their lack of leading, that maybe they're letting a church lead them in a not a healthy way, you start to see the importance of it. And I remember reading years ago, Convicted to Lead, I think is the name of the book from Al Mohler.
Yep.
That was so helpful to me. Because I think I don't have a problem leading when I know it's God's will. Like if I've got Bible verses and I've got the Bible saying, hey, this is the way we're supposed to go. Like we shouldn't have any problem at all having a conviction that this is the right thing and this is the way we should go, and we can go this way, and we can push people in this way, and we can encourage them and do it with love. And I think people want to follow someone, like that. And then I think just seeing my own failures and I think there's leading a church is one thing, and then leading a staff is something different. I think seeing my own failures in leading staff, there are some secular books I think that have really helped me. I hope that my staff would say it's been helpful to me. And just being able to give direction, like the Apostle Paul gives the Corinthian church direction.
Right.
He expects them to do it. And he tells Titus, "I'll leave you in Crete," said elders in those churches, but he gives them direction and he lets them do it. I think that's helpful to know, to be able to give some direction, but then encourage people to do it. So I think Convicted to Lead was really good. Simon Sinek, Leaders Eat Last is a good book. Start with Why. There, the Clifton Strengths or something like that. I don't remember. I don't know exactly. Maybe that just is. Maybe that is the title of the book.
Strength Finders.
What is?
Strength Finders.
That was helpful to me, and just saying, find what people are passionate about doing, and let them do that, and put them in those places, and let them do what they're passionate about doing.
Darrell, it's been fun to watch the Lord at work in your life. It's still exciting to see how God's using you at Living Hope. I'm grateful for you and Angie and your children, and appreciate you taking this time. Thank you for joining Leadership Lessons.
Thank you, brother.
Thanks for listening to Leadership Lessons. An audio podcast of this program is available on both Apple and Android devices. The Kentucky Baptist Convention was created by churches, for churches, to help churches reach Kentucky and the world for Christ. For more information about the KBC and the cooperative program which fuels our ministry, go to kybaptist.org. We'll see you next time on Leadership Lessons.